We've got a very special moment in the life of this church. And for those who don't know the tradition, we have a Tapestry of Faith here. And, oh, there we go. We have sound. And we're reminded by the church saints throughout the years that faith is not just from a logical, rational understanding, but it is actually something that is incarnate, that is woven together. And so we weave a tapestry. Now, I'm not someone who knows much about weaving. You might not know about a tapestry, but it's many threads. And we're going to explore some of those threads with Carol today, as Carol prepares for the next season in her life, the next journey.
Yep.
And I guess just to frame the 25-minute conversation we're going to have, so get comfy, this is an invitation to be part of the journey. And as I was reflecting about this, I was thinking that I was 19, maybe 19 and a half when we first met.
Yep.
And I remember being...
Such a smart ass.
Some things change, some things don't.
But I loved you.
So we've known each other for 17 years. And I remember that, coming in, from always there was an invitation into the journey, no matter how young you are to the church or how young you are in years. So let's start. Some of these good folks here don't know you. Yep. Some of us know you real well, too well.
Warts and all.
Some of us don't know you at all. So we're going to start with 7 decades in 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And we're gonna
don't time me.
We're gonna get to the church doors here, and so you can get a bit of a background on who this wonderful person Carol is.
Well, the point of this, storyline is that I obviously don't come from nowhere, and none of us do. We all have a story, and it's good to remember it. To look how far you've come or how you've changed or what you've learned, because it helps you sort of, have some perspective. So it's important to know that I was born in 1955, but in a post-World War II world. I was a baby boomer, and there was a lot of optimism around. It was a good time, I think, to be somebody who was a parent, because it was just a lot easier than the decades to come. So I was born in July 1955, and Disneyland opened its doors for the very first time in 1955, in July 1955. 5 days after I was born, doors opened. So it was like this need for nostalgia, fantasy, and futurism sort of set the scene. That's what people were looking for after the war and stuff. But also, the Vietnam War started in 1955, and that was in the background. Kennedy was assassinated in this decade, 1963. Southern California was La La Land back there. But all that is to say, I had a fantastic, wonderful childhood till 10. Spent a lot of time in the wilderness, camping, backpacking, all that kind of stuff. So it was where my awe and wonder and understanding of God in the wilderness was sort of, that seed was planted. The second decade was, obviously the Vietnam War had been going on, and Nixon sort of had this, what they called a Vietnamization sort of thing happened. And it was kind of bubbling along, and people were getting drafted to go to the war and all that kind of stuff. I was in still La La Land. But in 1971, 72, I was at the end of my high school 8 years. We went to Africa. My dad took a sabbatical leave and went to Africa, and we spent a year there. And that was the beginning of my world going a little bit off kilter, because I had never experienced anything like that in my life. Coming from Orange County, Southern California, Disneyland, to a world that was full of poverty and color and I lived on a missionary kid station, so it was all white and, imperialistic and all that kind of stuff. So that was set me on a different path that I wasn't probably aware of at the time. I went to Bible college for a year, and I kind of unceremoniously left that year. I was a little disillusioned because of, I think probably for the first time in my life I started having questions, but I didn't really have the capacity to know how to find the answers. I went to Berkeley after that and joined a street theater troupe called Berkeley Street Theater. It was an internship program. I was only going to stay there for a summer. It was run by Christian World Liberation Front. And I lived in Dwight House, which was a crisis accommodation center for homeless people. And we invited, I wasn't on staff, but we invited people. We had a certain number that could come in every night and sleep on the floor. And we all had dinner together around this huge table, and we read Winnie the Pooh. And this whole experience in this decade, the scales kind of fell off my eyes, and I walked around Berkeley with my eyes like this. I'd never experienced half of what I saw. And at that time I met this crazy Australian. His name was John, and he came through Dwight House and barely noticed me.
That's foreshadowing, by the way.
So anyway, my brother and I moved into our own house out of Dwight House because it's a little bit, we decided we wanted to kind of form a community of people who were working together back in those days. And John actually came back in that era, and he started leading Bible studies, doing the cost of discipleship, radical discipleship stuff. So for the first time in my life, I had this reconnection with the Bible. I had this aha experience. Go, oh, okay, so it's not like that. This actually makes more sense, especially in the context that we were in at that moment, with a lot of homeless people, a lot of poverty, a lot of political action, a lot of craziness going on. And for the first time, I thought this actually is relevant. It made sense to me. So the Bible studies were all about the cost and kind of getting to the essence of the root. Radical discipleship is about the root truths of what it means to follow Jesus. So it's going back to the essence of it, getting rid of all this other stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I had that verse, is that basically it's kind of been the core of our story, John's and mine's story, is that if you want to, here is the test. If you want to know if you're following Jesus, then walk as he walked. Do what he did.
So while you're taking a sip, we might go through the next 2 or 3 decades. Quicker.
Okay. So the thing that happened, though, is it's really key to me, is that I had a kind of a political awareness happening. Watergate was going on at the time. And we got involved in nuclear protesting because it was really, there was an urgency about nuclear war. And as Christians, we felt that we had the right, we needed to stand against it. So there was a lot of creative stuff happening at that time. It was basically, that Bob Dylan song, Times Are A-Changin'. It was like really, really like that, really happening. So in between, at the end of that time, I ended up going to Europe for a year. I felt like I needed to, not a year. I went for about 3 or 4 months, felt like a year. I needed to kind of reflect and take some time off. And I actually went, it was a bit of a pilgrimage. I went and visited different Christian communities that John had told me about. And I went to L'Abri for a month and studied with Hans Ruckmacher, who was he wrote Modern Art and the Death of the Culture, and I was quite into performance art and stuff like that at the time. Came back and did a lot of training, Leonard Pitt School of Mime, Volquitzo, Modern Dance, Chabot, Conservatory of Mime. I did circus skills. I was really into the creative stuff, and I thought that was going to be the path that I took. So what happened was that the Bible studies we were doing, we started to take seriously, and we thought maybe we should really hold all things in common and be a community and figured out what that meant. So my brother and I sold our house and put it in the pot with a couple other people, and we started a common life together at Bartimaeus Community. This third decade, it was very transformational for me. It's when I got married. We went back to Australia for a while, So when I had 3 kids. I was studying for a while. My husband started doing his Master's of Divinity, and he did it, and then he started a PhD. We ended up going to Mexico for 6 months because he needed to do Spanish for his one of his PhD languages. And that's where another sort of brain explosion happened, where we met Central American refugees and met and talked and drank with these liberation theologians from all over the world who had come for a respite at the seminary, and met particularly one particular person who told his story about how he was saved by Oscar Romero, and that kind of was another sort of explosion. So then John got a call to be the minister at Avalon Baptist Church, so we went from Mexico City back to Australia.
Now, just think about that. Mexico City to Avalon Baptist Church. And if you're not from Sydney, how would you describe Avalon in a sentence?
Very white. Beautiful. Especially back then, it was just full of great people, but, fairly privileged. There were a lot of back in those days, there were a lot of people who were just ordinary people that had lived there all their lives. But then there are all these really wealthy people moving in and buying up the places. So the way it is today is a bit different than it was back then. But
good.
Yeah, and the reason why we went to Avalon Baptist Church is because John grew up there. After he became a Christian, he went to that church and he worked with Torvald Lorenzen, was a minister there for a while, and Torvald was his mentor. So we went back there, and it was a great time. For me personally, I was able to do a lot of work in creative stuff. We had George Hirt reviews. I did a lot of performing with the group of people, Passion Mime and stuff like that. But the incredible thing that happened is that one day I realized that the refugees that we were working with and supporting and helping build at the move into some of the houses were working with the Catholic Church and the Uniting Church at the time to have this support group there. I actually got to meet and see the man that told me his story about being saved by Oscar Romero. Had actually immigrated to Australia. The government brought him over, he and his family. So it was this amazing kind of connection that, I don't know, it was just kind of a real shot in the arm about miracles and, how people can be saved from those horrible situations. 5th decade, John and I both, we moved back to Melbourne for a while, then we came back here. I started working at Paddington Uniting Church to run their community arts program, and John was called to be a chaplain at Sydney Uni, and he was running the chaplaincy for Sydney Uni, UNSW, and UTS, and doing preaching around the place. So that's when everything started happening. Again, it was about the Bible studies and that formation sort of experience for young adults. And I think that John, especially, more so than me, had a real call to being committed to the church, to be the body of Christ, to be the church, and encourage and grow the church and influence it to get back to its roots. And so that's what the Bible studies were all about, is trying to get people in that age group to really think about what it meant to follow Jesus and to basically ruin them for life so that they will, just look at it as something that's a serious call if you feel it, and that it will impact your life in all the different layers that you're in. So in the midst of all that, there was a faith community that grew up out of that group I think John was a chaplain for like almost 20 years, but at that time, this is when David and others came in, and the ebb and flow of that community is fairly understandable because university age is a very transitory, people come and go, but we happened to get this group that sort of started, it became a faith community and of the Uniting Church. And at one stage, Kent Crawford, who was a mission officer at the time or whatever, I don't know what his title was at Presbytery of Sydney, he talked to us about pulling up stakes and moving from Ultimo, which is where we were based, to come to Leichhardt Uniting Church. It was an older church, older congregation who, there's a few people still around.
Pensoni is one of them.
Who, it was one of those situations where the minister needed to go eventually, and the church, having an incredible history with hundreds of people part of this congregation, was sort of dwindling down. And he thought that it would be good, and they had no evening service, so he thought it'd be good if we come here, join the congregation, and help it grow. And now that took a year of process to talk about that happening.
So let's just pause there. So before we even get to the doors of Leichhardt Uniting, Carol has had this incredible story coming into this space. What happens next actually is reflected in your current title.
Yeah.
Which is Community and Property and Community Manager?
Something
Community
like
and
that.
Property Manager.
Something.
Because this beautiful building that you see, cared for a century or so by good people like Pensoni and others, looked quite different 11 years ago or 10 years ago, whenever it was. And in many ways, the physical space matched some spiritual renewal with the people who were here and the new people coming in and trying something new. So as we move to the next phase of understanding this story and all these good folks' place in it, take us into some of the moments that shaped this story and your role coming into this church.
Well, I think it was really, key that it was all about timing. I mean, I really believe that God, is in control of some of these situations, and it was Kent's sort of vision and working with John to say, let's do this, and with some good preparation with their church council and ours, it was tricky, but we came the beginning, I think it was January 2011, and we just joined the congregation and worshiped on Sunday nights and encouraged other people to come. And John was really big on commitment, and we had this thing called Twicers. He really wanted people to not just come Sunday evening, but come Sunday morning. And there were different sermons each Sunday. But it was about building community, making the connection with those that had been here before and to those that are here now, and acknowledging wasn't a them and us kind of attitude, trying to nurture that, change that culture. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of tension about who are these people that coming to take over and all that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of, it was a really quite rocky at different times. But one of the things where I got involved, which was at the end of the first year we were there, is I was asked to, apply for the job, but to actually take over and manage Epworth House. Epworth House at the time was a pretty rundown, kind of gross, I couldn't even believe they charged rent sort of situation. At least that was my view. Community of people who are mostly...
But was it a community?
Well, it wasn't a community. It was a boarding house, basically. And, the church really believed that if they hired out the rooms to young adults from around the world, that they would invite them to come to church, they would come to church and they would grow the congregation. Well, it didn't really happen because it was boarding house. That's where they wanted to live, and it was cheap rent. And they actually had somebody there who was the cook who cooked for them, and so they paid room and board and all that kind of stuff. So we decided that we needed a strategy to grow this congregation. And it was a very intentional strategy of slowly changing the culture of that community next door. And the purpose for it really is to be a place to invite young adults who are interested in living in a Christian community and those that are willing to be part of the life and the work of this church.
Now, Carol, that sounds easy. Was it?
No.
No.
I mean, and it's never easy. It took probably a couple years for that to slowly get ready, but in reality, it probably took about 5 or 6 years for the culture of that community to be fully on board with not only living and working and learning what it meant to live in community, but to be integrated into the life of this congregation. And that was always the goal. But we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes. We had way too many people living together at certain times. But slowly the interview process has changed so that we were very clear about what our expectations were. And we're really trying to get people who really wanted, for whatever reason, were willing to go on that journey together as a community to make it a priority. So the beauty of it all was that it worked. We have some of our core members in our congregation who are church council people and involved in music have come from that story. And they've moved out and stayed. Whereas before, people would move out and they'd go, see you later. And that you had an impact on them. That you helped shape their faith formation. We know that we created a safe place for them to explore and ask questions. And they got mentoring, and they got a really happy, lovely home experience while being at uni. But the bonus is that they wanted to be a core member of this congregation, those that stayed. So it was risky. There was a lot of, like I said, we made a lot of mistakes. The thing that killed us in the end, not killed us, but the thing that was, I always sort of feel like when things go bad or are hard, that you're on the right road. Mm-hmm. Because it feels like when things are going well and your ministry's working and stuff, something will happen. And it's like, I know this is going to sound weird, but there is this sense that when good is prevailing, bad will come in. It's like when there's light, darkness seems to want to come. And whether you want to call that Satan or whatever, John used to call it the Satan, the splitter. Satan was like the splitter would come in. Wouldn't have to do much, just a little trouble, and the community would split or would have problems. So you'd have to put a lot of time and energy, which is fine, because when you're working as a human group of people, we all have ups and downs. Mental health is always an issue with all of us. So it's about not going fast. It's building a community that's sustainable and healthy, and it's full of people who it's not just about me, but it's about other people. And that building of community, in my view, is a very integral part of following Jesus.
And those moments of tension, there have been plenty, and feel free to join us for a drink at some point to share some of those, because we've learnt lessons, and I'm looking at my fellow former chairs, Rowan and Robin and others. We have wrinkles for each of those moments. We could spend a lot of time thinking about the different moments, and there have been many moments, and maybe we'll get a chance to recap on some of those moments next week at the service.
Yeah.
But let's turn to legacy.
Okay.
Let's turn to faith. When we were talking about this, I really see that the physical changes that have happened in this place. 11 years ago, that was on a tower.
Yeah.
There was a wall between the sacred space and the non-sacred space.
Yeah.
There were pews.
Yeah.
It's had a paint job.
That's right. I think the point is that when you build in community, it's not a virtual video game or an app. It's actually you're physically involved in it, and you put your blood and sweat into the place that is holding. This is a sacred space because this is where the community gathers, and it's where God is, and it's where we learn what it means to follow Jesus. And so it's sacred. So you have to make the buildings and the spaces reflect who you are. So breaking down barriers is an important one, making it open and inclusive and welcoming, not just in the theology, but in the space and in the way that we relate. The theology, the preaching, the music, has to reflect everything. And that's a process that a lot of people aren't even aware of happens. But yeah, it's risky. It takes commitment in order to. It's not a race. You don't ever get to the end of that journey of discipleship, but it's about doing it with integrity and bringing as many people along with you as you can and doing it together.
If you want to know who you are, you have to know where you've been.
That's right.
And part of what you wanted to share with this tapestry was that this place didn't just magically appear as it is.
Yeah.
it's been a journey. Do you want to share some of yours? Why does that matter to you?
I think that to understand where we are today, it is important to sort of think about where we've come as a congregation. We had John, my husband John, was the minister here for a few years, and then he got cancer, and he was cured of that, but then he retired. So we were without a minister for a year. So we were kind of the core group of people were working really hard, trying to sustain the place and grow community and be faithful with 2 services, and we had a lot of people come and preach and stuff like that. And then we got a minister. Again, they had everybody set up a J&C, like real adults, trying to do this church thing. It did a J&C and called a minister and it was great, exciting, It ended up being the person was here for 6 months, and it was great for quite a while, but then it was one of those situations where it felt like the call had changed. And so after 6 months, we were without a minister again for 3 years. And I just feel like it was apparent that we all needed to hang in there and work hard. We had a lot of ministers come preaching. We had the core group worked. It was just that commitment of that this place is worth saving, not because it's a great building, but because it's the theology. It's the place where people can come and be who they are and learn how to be the hands and feet of Jesus. It's a safe space. It's a sacred space because of the theology. So time went on, and I'll tell you a little unknown fact. I messaged Adrian about 2.5 years into that story and said, "Hey, why don't you get Rads to apply for this job?" Because there were other people, other people applying, and it was like, it was kind of not really a joke, because I was really serious. One of the things that we needed is somebody who you could talk in shorthand to, that knew the story, that knew the theology, and you could trust them to take you in the right direction. The theology was not at question, the commitment, the call, all that kind of stuff. So, but to get to where we are today, thank God, it worked out that we not only got Rads and Hadrian, but the time was right, and they maybe 3 years or 4 years before they came, maybe they weren't ready or we weren't ready. But I think, again, that change and that growing and getting new people coming in and surviving COVID together as a community is a real test and testimony, I think, to this place.
So as we finish, you had 2 really powerful readings. Yep. One very short.
Yep.
And that psalm, which is full of, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
As you think about the legacy, and there's no sin in having confidence in the legacy. There's no, pride is, you should have a great deal of pride, I think, anyway, in your legacy. What is it that you think about in terms of this community and the legacy that you hope for as it relates to those readings in your faith?
Well, that reading, the John 1, I can remember the Bible verse, 1 John 2, has for John and I kind of been this core theme, because it's like keep it simple, stupid, just do what Jesus did, sort of thing. The implications of following Jesus are a little bit more scary and can take you places, and it's risky and all that kind of stuff. But so I think it's about keeping it simple and remembering that we're part of a bigger story. It's not just about this place. It's not the only place in the world that's doing what it's doing, but it's come from a really incredible story way before we got here. The story of mission, planting, doing incredible social services, but it's come from I don't know, the Uniting Church making a commitment to chaplaincy for 20 years and beyond, understanding that if we're going to grow and change the church and keep it to where we feel we're called to go, that you have to invest in formation of young adults. And formation, not only formation for me is a choice. You can't, I think I go on and on in my head sometimes when I'm driving back and forth, and it's just like the mutterings of a mad woman, basically, in my head. But
It's a long drive to Avalon, back and forth, yeah.
But it's all the stuff, all the history, all the legacy from, because it's not about me, it's really about where this place has been brought to, every single person that is here, and how to sustain that kind of theology, and how to sustain that for future people, because that will change. It has changed the Uniting Church, that story, and it will, to give it the courage and the faith to stand up against people who are not against, same-sex marriage or whatever. All the issues that we have to come up against as Christians, to stand with, to be brave, and you can't do that alone. You have to do that in community. I'm really, I really feel strongly about that we have to build a safe and healthy community. And that means that you have to slow down sometimes and have to take stock and remember and take care of one another. You can't do that in isolation of all the stuff that's going on. It's about long-term journey, and those kind of, ways of taking care of each other, that kind of, it's not just about me. It is about me. It's not just about me, though. Those sort of values and those lessons are all things that we need in our own personal relationships. We need to pull them into our families and at work in different places. I think my main sort of thing I would want to say to everybody in this community is, don't take this place for granted. You have to save it. You have to take care of it. Your body needs to be in this building. I used to study Augusto Boal is a guy an amazing Central American guy who did poor people's theater, and he has this expression where you don't want to be a spectator, you want to be a spec actor. So we don't want spectators on this journey. We want people who are actors in it, who take their bodies on that journey together and take people with us and create this space. That means that that we are the church. We are the body of Christ. Well, what does that mean? Where did that body walk to? Where did that body go? Who did they sit with? Who did they eat with? And who did they stand against? And it's not about, in that journey, there's betrayal, there's, power struggles, all that stuff that Jesus went through before he was crucified. We don't need to be crucified. Jesus did that. We are precious, bought by blood of Jesus. So that sort of ethos, that sort of culture is what will sustain this place. But it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen unless you make it happen. So
Amen.
If you value this place and if you want it to sustain, it's not about numbers, it's not about that. It's about presence and being here. So I guess that's my...
Amen. Amen.
Whatever.
Whatever.
I talk too much, I know.
So next week, we've got your closure of ministry. I'm looking to Rads and Adrian. Is that what we're calling it? Closure of ministry. And we hope that those 6 people or 7 people on the camera show up if you can, to be physically here and present as a new season begins for you. And maybe we'll touch on that next week. Yeah. The new season for you, moving out of the professional role of the church into a new season of faith as carer, as journey person on the journey.